Hey everyone, welcome. Today we are doing 20 anatomy and physiology focused practice questions for your ATIT's exam. If you like these questions and you need more practice, I have developed an anatomy and physiology study guide specifically formulated for the ATITs, and it comes with 362 practice questions. So if you'd like to get that study guide with the 362 practice questions, I will leave the link down in the description below. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started.
Alrighty, question number 1. The fingers are blank to the wrist. A, inferior, B, superior, C, lateral, D, distal, or E, proximal. So our answer here is distal. The fingers are distal to the wrist. So inferior means towards the bottom, superior is towards the top, lateral is towards the side of the body, distal is further from the trunk of the body, and proximal is closer to the trunk of the body. So when we're talking about directional terms, you can often think of two terms paired together and they do the opposite of each other. So in this case, distal by definition is further from the trunk of the body, and in contrast, proximal means closer to the trunk of the body. So proximal and distal pair together. So here's how I figure out if something is proximal or distal. Normally in a question, you will be given two body parts. Whichever one is closest to the body is proximal. And the body, I mean the chest and abdominal area. So whichever one is closest to the body is proximal, and whichever one is furthest from the body is distal. I'd like you to take a minute and write in the answer for the following two sentences using the information we just learned. Okay, I'll give you a minute. Alrighty, you guys ready? The ankle is distal to the patella, and the patella is proximal to the ankle. By the way, where is the patella found, you guys? Yes, the patella is a sesamoid type bone found on your knee. It's also known as the kneecap. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that the ankle is further from the body than the patella is, and the patella is closer to the body than the ankle is. Alrighty, question number 2. The peripheral nervous system includes which of the following? Select all that apply. A, peripheral nerves, B, spinal nerves, C, cranial nerves, and D, the spinal cord. So our answer here is peripheral nerves, spinal nerves, and cranial nerves. So we know the nervous system can be split into two major categories, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The CNS includes the brain, brainstem, and spinal cord, and the PNS includes the peripheral nerves, cranial nerves, and spinal nerves. The peripheral nerves are technically spinal nerves, but they are the portion that is most distal to the spinal nerves. So if that makes sense. I only point that out because some textbooks and teachers like to refer to them as peripheral nerves. Okay, so the peripheral nerves include the afferent or sensory nerves and the efferent or motor nerves. The cranial nerves relay sensory information from the head to the brain, and there are 12 cranial nerves, as you can see from the illustration above. And the spinal nerves are attached to the spinal cord. They relay information to and from the body. Question number 3. In a negative feedback loop, if a variable increases past its normal range, what happens? A, the body starts a mechanism that moves the variable even further from the set point. B, the variable will not change. C, the variable will reverse until it has gone below the set point. Or D, the variable will reverse until it is within the normal range. Our answer here is the variable will reverse until it is within the normal range. So first off, let's make sure we know what negative feedback is. Negative feedback is a mechanism used by the body that returns variables back to their normal ranges or set points. Variables are referring to things such as body temperature, oxygen level, hormonal levels, electrolyte levels, and blood pressure, just to name a few. Set point is referring to an ideal normal value, and normal range is a fluctuation around the set point. Normal range is also referred to as the parameter. So it is important that you know set point and normal range are not the same thing. For example, the set point for an optimal body temperature is 98.6, and the normal range, however, is still acceptable and ranges from 97 to 99.6. So you see the normal range fluctuates around 98.6, the ideal set point. Okay, so a negative feedback loop opposes the stimulus. Basically, it's going to do the opposite. So for example, if body temperature is too high, negative feedback is going to lower it. And if body temperature is too low, negative feedback will try and make it higher. So let's look at why the other answers are wrong. A, the body starts a mechanism that moves the variable further from the set point. This is actually describing positive feedback. Positive feedback intensifies the stimulus even further away from the set point. By the way, a common example used for positive feedback is uterine contractions during childbirth. So you might see that on your exam. B, the variable will not change. That does not describe negative feedback at all, because in negative feedback, the variable is changed back to its normal range. C, the variable will reverse until it's gone below the set point. Not necessarily true. Negative feedback just wants the variable to be within normal range, not necessarily below it. Before we move on to the next question, just know that some common examples of negative feedback you might see on your exam are body temperature, glucose levels, and blood pressure. These are all regulated and maintained within a certain range by the negative feedback loop. Alrighty, question number 4. Which of the following parts of the peripheral nervous system is under voluntary control? A, the sympathetic nervous system. B, the parasympathetic system. C, the somatic nervous system. Or D, the central nervous system. Our answer here is the somatic nervous system. So we already know that the nervous system is broken down into the CNS and PNS. The CNS is the brain, brainstem, and spinal cord, and it interprets incoming stimuli from the body and relays the appropriate motor response back out to the body. The PNS receives sensory stimuli from the environment and sends the message to the CNS. The PNS includes all nerves outside the CNS, so it includes the cranial, spinal, and peripheral nerves. Okay, so our PNS can be further broken down into the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The somatic system works under conscious or voluntary control. This involves the skeletal muscles. In contrast, the autonomic system works involuntarily. We have no control over these movements. So what do you think some examples of involuntary movement are? Well, two very high yield examples are heart rate and respiratory rate. Generally, we do not think about every single time our heart beats or we breathe. Our heart contracts without us having to think about it. Our lungs and muscles around the lungs help us breathe without us telling it to do so. So that means they work involuntarily. Whether we tell these muscles to contract or not, they're going to do it. Okay, so the big takeaway here is that the somatic system works under voluntary control and the autonomic system works under involuntary control. So since we're here, let's take a look at two more subdivisions the autonomic system splits into. The autonomic system splits into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. The sympathetic system activates during the fight or flight response. Fight or flight response is triggered by any type of stressful event. So whether you're speaking in front of a big audience or running away from a lion, your body might feel nervous and stressed. So your body will do a few things to help you either take flight or fight in the situation. So things like pupil dilation, increased breathing, sweating, increased heart rate. After your body has gone through a fight or flight response, or when you are generally at rest, your body activates the parasympathetic system. During this time, the body does work that maintains homeostasis. So things like digesting food and urination, and there is also a decrease in your blood pressure and heart rate during this rest and digest period. So one last thing, some people like to think of the P in parasympathetic as peace. P for peace. And when we think peace, we think calm and rest. So rest and digest. Alrighty, next question. Question number 5. Which of the following hormones increases uterine contractions? A. Prolactin. B. Oxytocin. C. Luteinizing hormone. D. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. E. Thyroid stimulating hormone. F. Growth hormone. Or G. Melatonin. Our answer here is oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus, but it travels to the posterior pituitary gland where it is stored and released when it's needed. So oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions. By the way, is this an example of positive feedback or negative feedback? Positive feedback. Yes, uterine contractions increasing are an example of positive feedback. Okay, another thing to add is that oxytocin is also responsible for the let down reflex, and this is referring to breast milk being ejected from the nipple. So make note that this is not the same thing as milk production. This is the milk being released or ejected. Prolactin is the hormone responsible for milk production, and oxytocin is the hormone responsible for milk ejection. Okay, so let's go over some of these other hormones. Prolactin is responsible for milk production, and it's released by the anterior pituitary gland. Luteinizing hormone, or LH for short, stimulates ovulation and the development of the corpus luteum, and it stimulates the secretion of estrogen and progesterone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH for short, is excreted by the anterior pituitary gland, and it stimulates the adrenal glands to release glucocorticosteroids and androgen. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH for short, is released from the anterior pituitary gland. It stimulates the thyroid to produce T3 and T4. Next, the growth hormone, or GH for short. This promotes growth of all bodily tissues. Lastly, we have melatonin. Melatonin is released from the pineal gland. It peaks at night and it promotes drowsiness for sleep. Alrighty, question number 6. Which of the following are released when blood glucose is too low? A. Glucagon. B. Secretin. C. Insulin. D. Calcitonin. Or E. Leptin. Our answer here is glucagon. Glucagon is released by the pancreas when blood glucose levels are too low. It increases blood glucose levels by stimulating the liver to convert stored glucose, or glycogen, into a more usable form and releases it into the bloodstream. Glucagon also prevents the liver from taking in and storing more glucose, so the glucose remains in your blood longer. So let's go over these other hormones. Secretin stimulates the pancreas to release bicarb, which neutralizes stomach acid in the duodenum, and it stimulates the liver to release bile, which breaks down large fats. Together, these help improve digestion. So secretin helps with digestion. Next is insulin, and I can't stress how important it is for you to know this hormone. Insulin is released by the pancreas, and it works to lower blood glucose levels by promoting the uptake of glucose. Calcitonin is released by the thyroid gland, and it works to decrease calcium levels in the blood. Lastly, leptin is a hormone that causes a feeling of fullness, which lets the brain know that you are no longer hungry. So leptin overall helps maintain a healthy body weight. Alrighty, question number 7. Which of the following brings oxygenated blood from the right and left lungs back to the heart? A, the right and left pulmonary veins, B, the aorta, C, the right pulmonary artery, or D, the left pulmonary artery. Our answer here is the right and left pulmonary veins. First off, the terms deoxygenated or unoxygenated is referring to blood that is low in oxygen and relatively high in carbon dioxide. This blood is coming from the body and moving towards the heart and lungs so that it can pick up oxygen and drop off CO2. Deoxygenated blood from the body enters the superior and inferior vena cava, and the superior and inferior vena cava open up into the right atrium. Blood fills the right atrium, then flows through the tricuspid valve and into the right ventricle. Then it gets pushed up through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. Then the blood splits into the right pulmonary artery, which goes into the right lung, and the left pulmonary artery, which goes into the left lung. So leaving the right and left pulmonary arteries, the blood finally reaches the right and left lung. And here is where gas exchange happens, meaning the blood is going to drop off CO2 and pick up oxygen. So how does the blood get back into the heart? Well, notice below the pulmonary arteries, there are a couple of pulmonary veins. You can distinguish them because they are slightly smaller. The veins are smaller than the arteries. So blood is going to leave the lungs via the pulmonary veins. Blood in the right lung will leave through the right pulmonary vein, and blood in the left lung will leave through the left pulmonary vein. Then they will meet at a small opening in the left atrium. So there is a small hole in the wall of the left atrium. You can't see it here, but it opens up and it allows blood to flow from the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. So question, is this blood here oxygenated or deoxygenated at this point? Oxygenated, yes. This blood just came from the lungs and it is full of oxygen. Okay, now this blood is going to flow from the left atrium down through the mitral valve and into the left ventricle. Next, it will be pushed up through the aortic valve and into the, you guessed it, the aorta. Notice how the aorta wraps around the back of the heart and then it leaves the heart at the bottom here. From here, the blood travels to smaller arteries and veins around the entire body. And we know that in the body tissues, another type of gas exchange happens, right? This time, blood will drop off oxygen to body tissues and it will pick up CO2 waste product. So it drops off the good stuff and it picks up the bad stuff. Alrighty guys, question number 8. Systole describes blank. A, the contraction phase of the heart, specifically both ventricles contracting. B, the contraction phase of the heart, specifically both atria contracting. C, the relaxation phase of the heart, specifically both ventricles relaxing. Or D, the relaxation phase of the heart, specifically both atria relaxing. Our answer here is A, the contraction phase of the heart, specifically both ventricles contracting. So we have two major phases of a heartbeat. One phase is called systole and the other is diastole. During systole, the ventricles contract and squeeze together, pushing blood upwards towards the pulmonary artery and the aorta. During this time, both the semilunar valves are open. So what are semilunar valves, you guys? The semilunar valves are referring to the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. Both are open, allowing blood to flow through them towards the pulmonary artery and the aorta. The aortic valve allows blood to flow to the aorta, and the pulmonary valve allows blood to flow to the pulmonary artery. So as a general rule, when two valves are open, the other two will be closed. So take a close look at the illustration. Can you think of why it's important for two valves to stay closed? Yes, it's important to prevent backflow of blood from leaking into areas it's not supposed to be in. So for example, during systole, the mitral and tricuspid valves are both closed to prevent blood from leaking back into the atria during contraction, because the ventricles are squeezing and pushing blood upwards. So if these valves were open, blood would go back into the atria. Okay, so right after systole happens, diastole begins. During diastole, both ventricles relax. During this time, both the atrioventricular valves are open, allowing blood to flow downwards from the atria to the ventricles. And at the same time, both semilunar valves are closed to prevent a backflow of blood from getting into the ventricles. Okay, so systole is the contraction phase of the ventricles, and diastole is the relaxation phase of the ventricles. Alrighty guys, time for a bonus question. Which of the following describe the lub sound when auscultating the heart? A, diastole, B, systole, C, lub represents both diastole and systole happening at the same time, or D, S2. There are two normal heart sounds we hear when auscultating the heart. Lub is one sound and dub is the other. These are the sounds of valves closing. During the beginning of systole, the mitral and tricuspid valve close, making a lub sound. Shortly after, during the end of systole and the beginning of diastole, the pulmonary and aortic valve close, making a dub sound. Lub is referred to as S1 and dub is referred to as S2. Alrighty guys, question number 9. Antibodies passed down from breast milk is part of which type of immunity? A, naturally passive immunity, B, naturally active immunity, C, artificially active immunity, or D, artificially passive immunity. Our answer here is naturally passive immunity. So first off, immune responses are either innate or adaptive. Innate is referred to our non-specific immunity, and adaptive is referred to our specific immunity. Both of these responses are active when we have some type of invader or pathogen in our body that needs to be fought off. The innate or non-specific approach is a general response. Basically, it's like using one type of solution to kill all pathogens. It treats all pathogens the same, and it is fast acting, meaning it arrives on scene very quickly and helps kill off pathogens. The adaptive immunity or specific can identify specific pathogens, so they respond to each pathogen uniquely. They treat all pathogens different. So one type of bacteria they will kill using one way, and another type of bacteria they will kill using another way. These are also slow acting because they require a bit more time to recognize and differentiate types of pathogens. Adaptive immunity can be further broken down into naturally and artificially acquired. Naturally, you are exposed to these in the natural environment, and artificially, you don't. This is something you would get from most likely a clinical setting. Both naturally and artificially are broken down into passive and active. Passive means your body put in no work, and active means your body puts in the work. An example of naturally passive are antibodies passed down from mother to baby via breast milk or placenta. These are natural to the baby because they are getting it from the natural environment, and it is passive because the baby's body does not need to work to get the antibodies. They are given to them by the mother. So let's take a look at an example of naturally active. These antibodies are produced actively in your body. Your body is working to make them after being exposed to a pathogen in the environment or becoming infected. Let's look at artificially passive. These are preformed antibodies that are introduced into your body. And an example of this is IV immunoglobulins. And we know immunoglobulins are just another word for antibodies. In contrast, in artificially active immunity, you are given a weak form or inactive form of an antigen, and your body actively makes antibodies to fight the antigen off. So you see, in passive, you are given the antibodies and you don't need to make them, but in active, you are given the antigen and you must make the antibodies to fight off the antigen. Hey guys, we're halfway there. We're on question number 10. I would just like to ask you a favor. If you are still here and you're learning something new, please hit the like button. I would greatly appreciate it. Alrighty guys, question number 10. Which of the following are part of the humoral response? A, B cells, B, T cells, C, natural killer cells, or D, macrophages? So remember from the last question, we have two types of immune responses, the innate or non-specific and the adaptive or specific response. So we're going to be focusing in on the adaptive response. Remember, the adaptive response is able to recognize different types of pathogen and kill them off uniquely. So adaptive immunity consists of the humoral mediated immunity and the cell mediated immunity. The humoral response is made up of B cells and the cell mediated response is made up of T cells. Humoral is referring to the fluids in the body, like the interstitial fluid, lymph fluid, and the blood. These fluids are where you find B cells. Plasma B cells produce antibodies formulated to bind onto specific antigens, allowing the antibody to neutralize the pathogen and mark it for destruction. Also, you should know that the humoral response is fast acting. Let's take a close look at the B cells and their role in the humoral response. Okay, so here we have little pathogens. All three of these are different types of pathogens. So one could be the chickenpox, the other the common flu, and the other could be COVID. So all three are different. On the surface of their body, you will find antigens. Antigens alert a response from the body's immune system and are recognized as a potential infection. So when the body recognizes these antigens inside the body, the immune system says, hey, these are not our cells and these are not part of us. We need to get rid of them. So these antigens are used to identify the pathogen. You can think of them like name tags. So you see this little pathogen's antigen looks triangular. This one looks like a square and this one looks round. They all have different shapes. Each pathogen has a different antigen that is unique to it. So here is where B cells come in. B cells recognize the specific antigen and they make antibodies for each one. These antibodies look like little Y shapes like this, and they are so specific to each antigen that they bind to them like a lock and key. Okay, so you see the antibody here. Watch how it can fit perfectly into the antigen. And look at this one here. Perfect fit. And look at this next one. The antibody fits with the antigen like a lock and key. Perfect fit. So this is important to know because it proves that not every antibody can effectively fit with every antigen. In other words, an antibody can only be effective on one specific antigen. So when these antibodies lock themselves onto the antigen, they are able to block the pathogen from spreading to nearby body cells. And this is one way B cells stop pathogens from infecting other body cells. Antibodies also neutralize the pathogen, making it less effective in spreading. So B cells also mark these pathogens for later destruction by macrophages. Phagocytic cells like macrophages circulating the area will look out for pathogens that are marked with an antibody, and this tells the phagocytic cell to eliminate the pathogen and eat it up. By the way, the process of B cells marking the pathogen for elimination is called opsonization. So let's take a look at this again. Remember, we are talking about the humoral immunity, and the B cells are at work here. They make antibodies that neutralize the antigens and surround the pathogen to block it from spreading to other cells. B cells also mark the pathogen for destruction by phagocytic cells. So this is all part of the humoral response. It's important to note that the action of phagocytic cells eating up the pathogens and cleaning up any debris made from the pathogen is actually part of the innate response. When the phagocytic cells go to work, like the macrophages, this is all part of the innate response, not the adaptive. Okay, so we've looked at the humoral response. Now let's look at the cell-mediated response and the involvement of T cells. T cells target the inside of the cell rather than the fluid surrounding the cell. Cytotoxic T cells kill infected cells, and cell-mediated immunity is relatively slow. The humoral response works to contain the pathogen and prevent the spread of infection, but cell-mediated response actually works on cells that have already been infected and kills them. Let's take a close look at how T cells kill infected cells. This is a normal body cell, and unfortunately, it has already been infected by a virus. Cytotoxic T cells will detect an antigen on the surface of the infected cell, and this lets the T cell know this cell needs to be killed. So the T cell will release a molecule called perforin, which makes holes in the pathogen. Then it releases enzymes that cause the cell to undergo apoptosis, which can also be described as self-destruction or cell death. Basically, the cell dies, and that's how T cells kill infected body cells. Any remaining debris that is made from the cell being killed will be picked up by any circulating phagocytic cells like macrophages. And this cleanup part is, again, not part of the adaptive immune response. It is part of the innate response. The cleanup crew is part of the innate response, while identifying and destroying the pathogen is part of the adaptive response. Alrighty guys, question number 11. Which of the following describe an exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide in the tissues? A, internal respiration, B, external respiration, C, aeration, or D, ventilation? Our answer here is internal respiration. Okay, so let's take a look at internal respiration and how it differs from external respiration, but also why not take a look at ventilation as well, because a lot of students get the words ventilation and respiration mixed up. So ventilation describes the physical process of the diaphragm contracting and relaxing, moving air in and out of the lungs. So ventilation is referring to diaphragm breathing, and that's broken down into two phases, inspiration and expiration. During inspiration, the diaphragm contracts, moving downwards. This allows the thoracic cavity to expand as the intercostal muscles contract. So where are the intercostal muscles? Intercostal muscles are between your rib cage, and when they contract, they move the thoracic cavity upwards and outwards. During expiration, the diaphragm relaxes, moving upwards, and this allows the thoracic cavity to get smaller while the intercostal muscles relax. The way I like to visualize and remember this is the diaphragm and the thoracic cavity take up relatively the same space, but there isn't room for both to be fully expanded at the same time. So when one is expanded, the other makes itself smaller to make room. Okay, so that describes ventilation. It is the physical process of the diaphragm moving up and down pretty much. Respiration describes a chemical process, specifically oxygen and carbon dioxide being exchanged. This is referred to gas exchange. There are two types of respiration or gas exchange. External gas exchange, which occurs in the alveoli. Here, carbon dioxide moves into the alveoli from the red blood cell, and oxygen moves from the alveoli into the red blood cell. Essentially, the red blood cell is dropping off waste and picking up oxygen. Internal gas exchange happens in the capillary bed. Here, carbon dioxide moves into the red blood cell from the tissue, and oxygen moves from the red blood cell to the tissue. Okay, take a look at this illustration here. What kind of respiration or gas exchange does this look like? Oxygen is leaving the alveoli and moving into the red blood cell, and CO2 is leaving the red blood cell and moving into the alveoli. External gas exchange. Great job. Yes. Okay, so what kind of gas exchange does this one look like? Oxygen is moving into body tissues and carbon dioxide is leaving the body tissues and moving into the red blood cell. Awesome. This is internal gas exchange. Okay, moving on to the next question, question number 12. Which of the following are part of the respiratory system? Select all that apply. A, nasal cavities, B, pharynx, C, larynx, D, trachea, and E, esophagus. Our answer here is the nasal cavities, pharynx, larynx, and trachea. These are all part of the respiratory system. The esophagus is not part of the respiratory system. It's actually part of the digestive system. So let's take a look at all of these, but keep in mind, I'm not going to go over every single part of the respiratory system, just these listed here. So first, let's locate the nasal cavities. The sinus found within the nasal cavities serve as a resonating chamber for the voice box. Within the nasal cavity, you will also find cilia, which helps sweep up and trap particles that are inhaled so they don't end up in our lungs. There are also goblet cells found here. Goblet cells produce mucus, which help trap particles so they don't make it into our lungs. Next, we have the pharynx. The pharynx is a highly muscular part of the throat. It is divided into three sections: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The important thing to note about the pharynx is that it carries food into the digestive tract, but it also carries air into the respiratory tract. So the pharynx is part of the respiratory tract and the digestive tract. You'll notice that the pharynx divides into two tubes. One tube is the larynx. The larynx is also known as the voice box, and within the larynx, you find the vocal cords. The larynx leads to the trachea, and the trachea eventually leads to the lungs. So that is part of the respiratory pathway leaving the pharynx. Now, the pharynx also leads to the esophagus. The esophagus leads to the stomach, and this is part of the digestive system. So again, you must know that the pharynx tube carries air to the respiratory tract and it carries food to the digestive tract. The pharynx is part of both the respiratory and the digestive tract. Okay, so since we're here, you see this little thing that looks like a little flap. You should 100% know the name of the structure and its function. This is the epiglottis. It closes or moves downwards when swallowing to prevent food from entering the respiratory tract. So it essentially blocks food from entering the respiratory tract. Alrighty guys, question number 13. Which of the following are least likely to be found in the glomerular filtrate? A, large plasma proteins, B, glucose, C, water, or D, urea? Our answer here is large plasma proteins. The glomerulus is a cluster of small blood capillaries Covering the glomerulus is a structure called the Bowman's capsule. Glomerular filtrate is the process by which the kidneys filter waste product out of the blood. This waste leaves the glomerulus and enters the Bowman's capsule. The glomerular filtrate barrier that surrounds the glomerulus only lets small molecules pass. So the molecules that get filtered through the glomerulus are water, glucose, electrolytes, urea, and amino acid. What does not get filtered through are blood cells and large plasma proteins. Alrighty guys, next question. Which of the following is the correct order of urine formation? A. Glomerular filtration, tubular secretion, tubular reabsorption. B. Tubular secretion, tubular reabsorption, glomerular filtrate. C. Tubular reabsorption, tubular secretion, glomerular filtrate. Or D. Glomerular filtrate, tubular reabsorption, tubular secretion. Our answer here is D. Glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and then tubular secretion. So there are 3 steps in urine formation. Basically, this is how the kidneys make urine. The first is glomerular filtration, the second is tubular reabsorption, and lastly, tubular secretion. So filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Filtration happens in the glomerulus, reabsorption happens in the renal tubules, and secretion happens in the renal tubules. During filtration, small molecules are filtered out of the glomerulus and they enter the Bowman's capsule. From here, those molecules go into the tubules and are referred to as filtrate. Next, reabsorption happens in the renal tubules. Certain molecules that your body might want back, like glucose, water, and amino acids, will be reabsorbed back into the body. And actually, about 99% of the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed. So these molecules will move from inside the tubules to nearby blood capillaries that connect to the rest of the body. Essentially, these molecules, or solutes, are reabsorbed and taken back into the body's circulatory system. Lastly, secretion takes place in the renal tubules. Certain substances like urea, creatinine, and potassium leave the bloodstream and go into the tubules. And anything inside the renal tubules at this point is going to become urine. Hey guys, sorry for the voice change. This might sound a little funny because I had to add this after the fact that I already edited, but I wanted to add this little part here. This is a nephron in the kidney. This is the glomerulus where filtration happens. And I want you to see the difference between secretion and reabsorption. So you see this little glucose here. This is in the renal tubules. Reabsorption is the process of molecules like glucose going from the renal tubules into the nearby peritubular capillaries. These peritubular capillaries take the molecules back into the blood system, into the body. And now you see this potassium here. This is in the blood system. This is in the peritubular capillaries. So any molecules going from the peritubular capillaries into the renal tubules is going to be excreted as urine. So you see the difference between reabsorption and secretion. Reabsorption stuff is going from the tubules to the capillaries, and secretion is stuff going from the capillaries to the renal tubules. Alrighty guys, next question. Which of the following gastric juices breaks down fats? A. Salivary amylase, B. lipase, C. pepsin, or D. hydrochloric acid? Our answer here is lipase. Lipase is an enzyme that breaks down fats. Can you also think of another substance that also breaks down fats? Yes, bile. Bile also breaks down fats. Bile emulsifies fats, which increases their surface area, making it easier for digestive enzymes like lipase to break them down even further. Salivary amylase is produced by the salivary glands and released into the mouth. It starts the process of breaking down starches. Pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down proteins. And hydrochloric acid, or HCl, creates an acidic environment in the stomach, which helps inhibit bacterial growth. It also activates digestive enzymes and assists in breaking down proteins. Alrighty guys, question number 17. Where is bile made? A, the liver, B, the pancreas, C, the gallbladder, or D, the stomach? Our answer here is the liver. Bile is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. When food is eaten, the gallbladder contracts and releases bile into the small intestines to help break down fats. Alrighty guys, question number 18. Which of the following muscle types are under voluntary control? A, skeletal muscle, B, smooth muscle, C, heart muscle, or D, all muscle types are under voluntary control. Our answer here is skeletal muscle. So let's go over the 3 muscle types while we're here. Skeletal muscles attach to bone via a tendon. In this illustration, you can see the calf muscle and the bone and the Achilles tendon. So the tendon is attaching muscle to bone. Some characteristic traits of muscle cells are they have dark striations, they are long and cylindrical, and they have multiple nuclei per cell. Skeletal muscle's main function is to produce movement. So when a muscle contracts and shortens, it pulls the attached bone with it, creating movement. So it's super important to note that skeletal muscle is voluntary. It is a voluntary muscle, meaning we have conscious control over these movements. So for example, throwing a ball, running, these are both voluntary movements that affect skeletal muscles. Next, we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle makes up the walls of hollow organs, blood vessels, and respiratory pathways. Smooth muscle cells have a branching network. They are tapered at each end, and they have 1 nuclei per cell. Smooth muscle's main function is to produce peristalsis in the GI system. Remember, peristalsis is the movement that pushes food through the digestive tract. Smooth muscle also regulates the diameter of openings like blood vessels. Smooth muscle is involuntary muscle, so we have no control over these movements. They function without us telling them what to do. So for example, peristalsis in the GI system, heart contraction, the expansion of the lungs when we're breathing, the contraction of blood vessel, all of these happen without us consciously telling them what to do. Lastly, we have cardiac muscle. This is found in the walls of the heart. Cardiac cells have light striations, intercalated disc, a single nuclei, and a branching network. So you'll notice on the illustration of the cardiac cells, there are light striations and the darker lines are intercalated disc. Cardiac cells function to contract the heart in order to keep blood circulating in the body. Cardiac cells are involuntary. Again, we have no conscious control over these movements. When the antagonist muscle is relaxing, the agonist is blank. A, relaxing, B, contracting, C, moving in a circular motion, or D, in a flex position. Our answer here is contracting. So muscles typically work together as pairs. One is the agonist while the other is the antagonist. The agonist is known as the primary mover. It is the muscle that causes a bone to move. The antagonist produces a movement opposite to that of the agonist. The antagonist must be relaxed when the agonist contracts and vice versa. For example, when the biceps brachii contracts to flex the forearm, the triceps brachii must relax. And vice versa, when the triceps brachii contracts, the biceps brachii must relax. Alrighty guys, question number 19. Which of the following breaks down bone? A, osteoblasts, B, osteoclasts, C, osteocytes, or D, osteons? Our answer here is osteoclasts. Osteoclasts break down old or damaged bone by releasing enzymes that dissolve bone tissue. Osteoblasts actually build bone. They are constantly forming new bone tissue. Osteocytes are the most abundant bone cell and they help maintain bone tissue. They are also derived from osteoblasts. Lastly, osteons are a functional unit of bone. So they are not a type of bone cell. They are a structure unit found in bone. Alrighty guys, last question, question number 20. Where does fertilization take place? A, the ovaries, B, the fallopian tubes, C, the vagina, or D, the uterus? Our answer here is the fallopian tubes. Fertilization is when the sperm and the egg unite and make a zygote. This takes place in the fallopian tubes. Okay, one last bonus question, guys. Where does implantation take place? A, the ovaries, B, the fallopian tubes, C, the vagina, or D, the uterus? Our answer here is the uterus. Implantation is when a fertilized egg, also called the zygote, attaches itself to the lining of the uterus where it begins to grow. Alrighty guys, that wraps up these anatomy and physiology practice questions. Remember, this only reflects a small portion of what could be on your exam, so make sure you are studying all the topics necessary. If you need a study guide that has all of the anatomy and physiology topics plus 362 practice questions, click the link below and it will take you to my shop.